conflict with your character. Is that what?
Yes.
Am I interpreting that right? That's pretty much the way I do it. I'm a character guy. I write characters, and I think about what kind of world, what kind of environment they could be in that would enhance their problems, because that's what we do as writers. We cause problems for our characters.
We torture them.
I have a hard time torturing my characters. I'm so nice. I write erotic romance and romantic mysteries. So I always have to go for the happy ending after, and I want the happy, but it's so hard to torture them along the way, but we have to.
Well, the happy doesn't mean anything if they haven't earned it. You know?
They've got to earn it.
My current one is based off of pulp style novels. So in those 60 pages that I mentioned, he's been knocked out 2 or 3 times. he's had so much stuff happen to him because that's the pulp thing is that the hero keeps getting stuff happening to him.
I remember thinking at one point when I was reading the Hardy Boys when I was growing up that those guys had to have brain damage because they got knocked out at least 3 times in every book.
I was thinking the same thing about Nancy Drew.
Same thing.
Same person. So.
We had a comment or a question from the audience. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I was going to ask you about erotic fiction. Once the characters go to bed for the first time, isn't the story over?
No.
It's not. Okay.
Because the first time that they go to bed, then that's where you introduce the problem.
Okay.
The reason why they think they shouldn't be together, some external force that's trying to drive them apart, or some other catastrophe that makes them rethink the whole deal.
Okay.
And from a television standpoint,
right.
Have you seen Farscape?
I guess not.
I have.
The 2 main characters get together early on, and then apart, together, apart, together, apart. And one of the cool things that they did in that show is when they put them together, they became Bonnie and Clyde. They became greater than the sum of the parts, and became sort of their own elemental force. And then they split up and all other stuff like that. But it's not like a lot of the other television shows where there's the tension going on. And once they sleep together, the rest of the show sucks. You know.
I thought they actually handled it really well in the X-Files because they just never told you. You just knew all of a sudden Scully's hanging out at Mulder's apartment and they're spending all that time together, and that's just how they handled it. They just never said it, they never showed it, but all of a sudden, occasionally they get that little kiss goodnight that shows, it's the kind of kiss of yes, we've been with each other for a while now. It was just funny.
Boiled down, the key is just like every other aspect of the story, you have to keep conflict and tension into it.
Okay.
If you reach, I'm going to say the word climax, but it's not used in the same way as you might expect. Once you've reached a plot climax, the key is then to go ahead and introduce a new problem until you get to the end of the story. And that's always the goal, is to keep having the ups and downs of the tension all the way to the conflict at the end.
And preferably the conflicts get bigger as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a series, somehow sustaining that. Alona Andrews. Gordon and Alona, they're a married couple that work on a series together. Eventually, a character that was saying no, not going to sleep with them, no, not going to sleep with them, eventually winds up married to the guy, and they managed to sustain it past that, even though it takes several books to get that far. That's not the end of the series. And as I understand it, they actually have a certain amount of books they want to write, so it's not like, oh, well, we're milking it after this, that we're getting sales. They actually plan past that point.
If you solve one plot problem, you introduce a new one.
And it can a little bit alternate between kind of personal, emotional, or the characters, the relationship or lack thereof, or at other times, I guess the hard plot with the drama of the external.
Sure,
story.
that's the way I write it anyway.
Okay.
Well, a lot of times if you solve one plot problem, it actually creates another, which is a funny thing, because you're just going, oh, well, finally we fixed it. Damn it.
It's always good if fixing one problem makes the other one worse.
Okay.
Or more.
Or
Several.
creates new problems.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
Branches off.
World building. You write fantasy.
Yes.
What is your actual process for world building?
I ran in real early to Patricia Reedy's World Building Questions. If you go look up that online, she has on her website, it's like 20-some pages of just questions about your world. And while you don't want to answer all of them because you really it's not worth your time, it does get you thinking about things like, okay, like say for social manners, who comes in the room first, the highest ranking person or the lowest ranking person? And that probably depends on how risky it is for them to walk in that room. You know, if it's a risky thing, you're probably going to send the fool in first, you know, unless you like him, and then you send the page or whatever. But you're gonna, you know, whereas if you're fairly safe and it makes you feel, you know, the most important person should come in first, that says something else about your society. You know, so like what kind of games do they play? What, you know, and then she had a whole bunch of questions about magic, which is, you know, I think we talk about this sometime later at the con. You know, what's the price of magic? You know, how does your magic work? And magic should be like science. Magic should have rules. And I like to set up my magic rules first before I really do all that much plotting, because then I have to live with them. And some of my best plot twists have come with say, you know, you're so tempted to just change the rule, you know, because it's inconvenient. And some of my best plot twists have come because I had to live with the rules that I made. And that came from looking at those questions and thinking about it, you know, how does my magic work? You know, who's in control of the magic? How do you get paid for doing your magic? And you know, you sit there and they have like these wizard academies that crank out wizards. It's like, what do they do? How do they make a living? Because they have to go out into the world and make a living. And if they're living in some tower somewhere and not selling their goods, how do they get their supplies? How do they eat? You know, so those are all kinds of things that, you know, real world things that are going to make your book seem so much more realistic, is if you have actual economy, you know, and the economy has real world factors in it that you've got to deal with. And I like to, the other thing I do is sometimes model off of a culture, kind of loosely. And I like these little DK books for the kids. It's like your life, everyday life in ancient Egypt. Okay, it tells you what they wore. It tells you how the social structure was. It tells you what they ate. It tells you how they worked. You know, and it's all in there. And you don't have to read. You don't have to skim through the parts about this pharaoh did this and that, because you don't care about that part unless you're doing kind of historical fantasy, which is not really what I'm doing. I'm just kind of trying to take a society and model after it so it feels like it works together. You know, this is because, you know, you can't, if you cherry pick, okay, I'm going to have, you know, the Russian system of government, but I'm going to have a society, you know, my customs will be English. That really wouldn't work, you know, because they're very different systems of government. They had very different belief systems. And so, you know, you can't really cherry pick unless they were similar societies.
Now, there is one side note to that. If you know both very well,
Yes.
and you can figure out how to mesh them, then you can do that because you know them very well. That's the exception to the rule.
One of the things to remember about world building is that every change you make has a consequence that ripples through the entirety of society. Even small changes, you've got to think about what that's going to do to everything else that you think is there.
Well, if you add a magic element or a science element to a society, obviously our society's never had that. So you'd have to think, for one thing, what is that displacing? What is that taking over? You know, because it's going to perform a function that something else performs now. Like, is it taking over the medical profession? If it's healing, if it's, you know, if it makes magic dinguses, maybe if you're enhancing certain things, like, I don't know, make gold stronger, or I don't know, whatever. But you know, if you're maybe swords stronger or something like that, well, then you're kind of having that blend in with your smithing culture, and it would change that. So, you know, you think, you know, if you have a religion that's, you know, that's taking over things, you know, what is that displacing? And so those are things you know, when you add something or take something out, you know, what void does that leave?
I've spotted what you were doing there, by the way. I saw that you were talking about these schools churning out all these wizards and them having to come up with something to do. Immediately I thought, lawyers. So it's your law background that's coming into this. I can see it.